let's start shading the can. So first of all, I'm going to resize my whole render settings to just fit this can. I don't need all of this other stuff. So let's hide all of these objects. There we go. And then go into the, let's try 1500. See what this does. Let's add in a little bit more focal length. There we go. Let's start with this guy. Usually for all my different elements, I create different tabs in the node editor. It makes it a lot cleaner, and often Maya regraphs your whole shading network when you do simple operations like duplicating geometry or just those tiny random things, and they make it regraph your whole shading network. It takes a while to figure it back out because you you can't undo it. So save a lot and work in tabs is my way of avoiding to have to refigure out my own work. Okay, so when I think of shading, I always think of layering. So I try to break up my shaders into as many layers as I possibly can. Working in layers is not always the most efficient way of shading objects, but it is by far the most manageable. So I will always first make everything and all the layers and mix them together with mixed materials. And then afterwards I might, if the performance really suffers from the layering and from the mixing of the shaders, then I might try and combine them and bake it down, etc., etc. But I always start in layers because it is just the quickest and the best way to get it all set up. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, we're going to make a rust material as the base material. So let's create an AI standard surface. Let's call it matte can rust. And also rename the shading groups. Let's rename everything as we go to keep it nice and tidy. Okay, so let's assign this over here. And then we can see that we've got some nice reflections going on, etc., etc. For the rust, I downloaded a couple of textures from CG Textures, or textures.com I think it's called now, because these were free and I can use these in this project. So let's load these in. Into the assets text folder, and then let's have a look at the textures.com albedo. This is an sRGB texture, so image versus color. Let's also load in the roughness map for this. There we go. I think these maps were generated in Substance. Okay. Let's assign this. Boom. Perfect. So it loads in our image. Now, there's a few things that we need to do. Let's first have a look at this node and go to the isolate select. There is not enough resolution, so in the UV coordinates over here, I'm just going to repeat it a couple of times to get a bit more resolution in there. 3 is perfect, so I need to do the same over here. Okay, so there's that. Now, I'm not too happy with the color of the rust. It needs to be darker. So in that scenario, I would always add an ale remap color to remap color values. I just drag it into the input, replace this over here, and then turn the gain down to another 0.5. Okay. Then over here we still have to battle the spec. And now it's way too glossy, and we need to change the metalness to be a bit more, metallic feeling. It is a corroded conductor anyway, so okay. Switch metalness to 1, and let's try and find a nice roughness value that we want to set as a base. So we're going to introduce some texture variation, some spatial variation, but we need to know what our midpoint is of that spatial variation ahead of remapping the node. So let's have a look. I think something like 0.4 is pretty nice. Perfect. So right now it's still very uniform. Let's just save this image over here so we can compare. And let's load in an ale remap float, because over here the roughness is a float value. It is not a color that you can pick, in which case you would go for the color option. No, it's a float value. So let's load the image into the input over here. Over here I have to select the add color R. Whenever I work with grayscale textures, I always work with the R channel. You can just as well choose the G or the B channel, but I choose the R because that's kind of how everyone does it. Perfect. And add this into the roughness. Over here, this is an sRGB texture. I'm not quite sure how accurate this roughness is. We're going to remap it anyway. So for now, I'm just going to leave it to sRGB. So when you actually paint your values, then you will want to change this to raw. But over here, I didn't paint it, so let's just leave it to sRGB and assume they left it in sRGB space. Perfect. So now we can start to see a variation in the roughness. Right. Let's just have a look at what this looks like. Let's create some more space. And over here, go to View, Status Bar, Display Pixel Information. So over here we can, in the right hand corner, we can see what the actual RGBA values are like. So we see a lot of like 0.9 all the way down to 0.5. So we're going to remap this a little bit, right? Get rid of this. Then this over here in the remap float. What we want to adjust is, first of all, we want to adjust the input min and input max. So we get a bit more contrast. Contrast is always good. There we go. Like often with spec and roughness maps, contrast is what really sets it apart. It's important in these kind of maps, the contrast in the variation. Okay, so now we have values up to 1 and all the way down to 0. Then in the output min and output max, we're going to remap this to something like maybe 0.28 and then 0.55, something like that. So we chose this value of 0.4 in the middle, and then we're going to work around that. And then we can start to see that we get some nice variation along the same roughness. So we chose that midpoint, and now we can get some variation in there. So I think this looks pretty nice already. It's pretty simple, but it does the job. We're not going to set up any displacements for the rust. because it's a can and it will be shaded with other stuff. We don't want it to be too displaced. Let's render for a second. Perfect. So now it's time to get the second layer on. So the second layer is kind of like a tin type metal. Let's create this AI standard surface. So as I said, we'll be using the standard surface for 99% of the shading work, except for the hair, or for volumes. Volumes have a different shader. Material can tin. Let's save this so we know what it looks like. Assign this, and let's start again. So the weight to 1, the color to, I think I want something darkish, a bit to the reddish sides, because you know it needs to be a little bit more dirty looking metal. There we go. If you push the metal on the slider, I like 0.3. As you see right now, we don't need any of these other settings. We're just creating very basic materials over here. So I'm just testing things out as I go. So maybe 0.25 is pretty nice. So you can still see some of the nice reflections. I don't need to let this render. I kind of know what this looks like. So then a bit more value to this. Yeah, something like this I like. So not too saturated, and as I said, the base color is actually taking over the first speck lobe over here now. And over here we can just see the edge tint color over here, which is in these type of materials less important. Perfect. So that's a good start. If you want, we can add complexity and manipulate the roughness in this, and it's all good and well, but we will be layering a lot of materials, and for now let's just go without it and see where we end up. So next up is an important step. We're going to create a AI mix shader. So this is a material or a shader which is used to mix two other shaders with a blending in between. So very standard kind of mixing. You can go for additive mixing, which breaks the physical properties or the physical plausibility of the shader, unless you obviously account for the distribution of the weights in the different shaders. So blending is the safest option, and that's what we are going to do. So let's add in the rust, let's add in the tin, and assign this over here. So right now it's just a 50% blend. It doesn't look very great, but let's rename this. Matte mix rust tin. Shading group. Okay, so right now the only thing we need to do is add in a nice mix. So what am I going to do for that? I'm going to load in an AI image. And over here, there's some dirt textures. So let's use some of these. Either this one, or this one, or this one. Let's go with this one first. Over here, I've previously chosen to put it into raw, because I just wanted those values. When you don't paint them yourself, you can choose. or not if you don't paint them yourself, but if you're going to remap them anyway, then sometimes it doesn't, you can kind of get to the same point, and it's mostly important with Z displacements, paint and roughness maps, and obviously put it to sRGB for all the others. So let's rename this to image breakup 01, because we'll be using multiple ones. And let's use an AL remap float, because we know we will remap it anyway to have more creative control over the values. And then let's add this into the mix. Perfect. So over here now we see this image. Let's tile it once again. Let's see if we can find a bit more of a pleasing distribution. Something like this. And then let's remap it. So right now, all was white will be the tin, all was black will be the rust. There's not a lot of rust yet, so let's just remap this and crunch those blacks a little bit so we can start to see it all a bit better. Let's have a look at this. Now you can see that we're mixing the tin with the rust. Maybe I'm not the biggest fan of how large these areas are, so I'm going to double it. And whilst looking at this, I think we need to decrunch the blacks a little bit more. Something like this. Yeah, let's just go ahead with this. Later on we can always manipulate it, combine this with different textures, etc, etc. But for now, let's just keep it like this. Perfect. And there's our nice little shading network so far. Next up is a label layer. So it's kind of like a paint layer of, the label and the color information of the package. So let's add in another AI standard surface. Let's call this matte can label. And let's add in another AI mix shader, just so we have it ready later. Matte mix tin label. I always like to pick the name of this one and combine it, so I know what we're talking about when I see in the outliner or have to regraph it, or you never know. Shading networks, they don't usually stay like this. You'll always have to figure them out again, and it's quite a pain. So renaming it is very, very important, not just for you and for others. That isn't. Okay, but first of all, let's have a look at the label shader. Let's save this image for comparison. There we go again. Standard. So let's load in an image. I've prepared images for this. So image can label color. Let's have a look. Coffee 01 label. Perfect. That's what we need. So load this in. It's an sRGB texture. And if everything is good, push this to 1. We should just have the coffee tin. Perfect. Let's look at it a bit more front on. It's nice, but there's a lot of little details which I like. For example, these patterns, it all will sell or help sell the object. But really, it's just way too clean looking right now, right? So let's add in another. Let's overlay or let's multiply some other dirt texture onto it. Let's create an L layer color, which we use to layer colors. It's very similar to the Photoshop, just layer palette or whatever you call it. So let's load in this to the input, add the change the alpha to 1 and just normal mode. Perfect. So then let's load in another image. Image can label dirt. Oh, yeah, let's leave it like this. And there was a scratch. Perfect. Stick it to a sRGB. Okay, so right now, what will we do? We will be driving the alpha of the layer color with this image. So this is a float input. So I'm going to add a AL remap float before that to have a bit more control over what exactly we are doing. So let's add this to the alpha, and then we have all the control we want over the color. Perfect. Let's have a look at what this actually is doing. Not much at all. That's strange. Aha, of course. Stupid mistake, it is not connected yet. And you can't do an isolate selection on things that are not in the shading network. So let's just add this into the color, and there we go. Should be able to see the scratch material, or the scratch image. Style this to maybe 2 and 2. And I don't want this big darker patch to be over the main label, so I'm just going to change this up a little bit. So that the lighter part is more at the top over here, just so it creates a nicer distribution of values in the shader. There we go. Perfect. So right now we can start to see that there's a bit more stuff going on, but I'm not super happy with it yet. So I'm going to lock it over here to this node, and then let's adjust it here. Okay, and what we can see right now is that we actually still need to invert this map. So how do we invert this map? We can do it in the AL remap float by just switching up the output min and the output max. And this feels better. So now the scratches are darker. Way too much. As you can see, I'm just fooling around myself, seeing what feels right. And it's all about how can you make this feel right. I think maybe the dirt needs to be a bit darker, and maybe it needs to slightly more saturated. Yes. Oh, I like this. So we have some extra scratches over here. It looks pretty neat. Let's remove the isolate selection. And yes, this already feels better to me. So let's go in and tweak the shader a little bit. Okay. First of all, I think it would be nice to add a little touch of metalness to the shader. And then let's have a look at the roughness values. Something not too rough. Maybe about 0.3. That feels pretty nice to me. There we go. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, so now next step is to layer them together. Now this is a mix, which is not the way we want it to be. Let's drag all of these guys down. And let's load in an image. I've already prepared these isolation maps, but yeah, just for the convenience, you know, There we go. And this is the isolation map that we're going to use as a base. Image label can label ISO for isolation map. And if we add this in over here, we should in theory have this working already. Yes. Now certain parts are, you can see the tin, we can see the rust. I'm going to look on that up a little bit more so we can catch the reflections a bit better and see what's going on. So you can see that we're looking at the other shaders over here, but everything looks way too clean. We need some chipping damage around the edges over here, and just generally, like, it's an old pot, it needs to look a bit older. So let's take care of that. I'm going to save this for reference. And okay, so this is probably one of the more advanced parts of the tutorial. Let's create some curvature masks and multiply it with this image to create a nice looking overall damage. So in our node we have the AI curvature node, and right now I'm just going to add in AI flat shader. An AI flat shader is kind of like a utility shader that I often use, because you can just add in flat values over here, and it's sometimes pretty nice to debug things. So I'm going to assign this and see what this looks like. That's okay. We can switch between convex and concave, adjust the radii, etc, etc. So now that we've seen this, to make this work properly, we need to first set up the proper subdivision settings, because right now it is not being subdivided at all, this object, and we see the actual polygon, the polygon edges. So in the shape node there's the Arnold tab, and in the Arnold tab over here we're going to leave everything as is. It's all okay. And in the subdivision tab, we're going to set the type to Catmull Clark, add maybe 2 subdivisions. It's already pretty dense, so we don't need so many unless we use displacement maps later on. So let's go for 2 right now. And let's just enable auto bump. So this is not important yet, but later on when we are going to use displacement maps, this is going to help us save some geometry. Perfect. So first things first, we have our curvature node over here, and now we have an image. How do we combine these? We're going to combine these using an AL combine float. Who would have expected, eh? So let's put this into the input 1. As always, the color R to the input 1, and over here the color R to the input 2. Very, very simple. And let's add this in. Now we have a bit more freedom, because we can look at this curvature node through this network. First of all, we need to figure out how what we want, you know? So what I really want is get some chipping along these, these distortions of the geometry. So let's see how we can approach that. Isn't looking too great. Okay, it's always a bit of fiddling around, but usually you can get quite nice results. Right now there's no threshold at all, so even if we add in a tiny bit of threshold, you can see what a curvature is doing over here. And this is the kind of thing we want. And we have it already over here. That is decent. Right now, however, if you let this render out and maybe add in another sample, then we will see that it's very uniform and it won't look very nice. So there's a couple of things we can do. We need to break this up. What we're going to do for that is that we're going to manipulate the radius of this node. So, and how we're going to do that? We're going to pipe a fractal into that. And the fractal will have values from about, let's do about 0 to about 0.5. I think that will be pretty nice. Okay, so let's create an AI fractal. By the way, you can just as well use an AI noise, but I prefer the fractal nodes from Anders Langlands because it's got a bit more control. It already has a remap node in it. It's just, I just prefer it. Let's pipe this into the radius. Add color to the radius. And we've got a crash. Who would have thought? Okay, so this doesn't usually happen. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I'm back. I just opened up the scene again. And as we render this, we see that there's nothing actually crashing Arnold. It was just a Maya kind of thing. Let's have a look at this. So, where did we end? I piped in a fractal into the radius of a curvature node. Perfect. So over here, let's log the selection. And we already knew that we want to go from about 0 to about 0.4. Those were kind of our ideal values. And then within this, I would always set a space to either object space or UV space or PREF space. Let's just use object space for now because we know this object will not be deforming. And yeah. By the way, if the object is deforming, you have to set a point reference or a position reference, and then you can use a world or object method in like with deformed objects. So right now let's just choose object because we know it won't be deformed. Can adjust the frequency. We can also see right now that everything is inverted, so we still need to invert this. 1. Oops, that did not work. It is the curvature node that we need to. Okay. Let's add in another remap float to do this. Add the input in, add color R to the input, to the second input. And over here, disable the lock isolate selection. There we go. Now we have a bit of a better view about what is actually being masked out. And right now, not a whole lot is being masked out yet. This is what our fractal looks like, the curvature node. Let's just try and create some harder edges. Get rid of some of the spread. Maybe we need to, let's look it on the curvature node again. And let's just play with it. Do we need more frequency in the fractal? Is that it? No, I don't think so. Maybe we need a bit more. not so obvious right now. From 0 to 0.4. I think over here will be 0. Which we generally want to avoid, you know. We want to have as much value, like if you use it like this, there will be a lot of clamping. So there will be a lot of 0 values, which is not ideal. I would rather have more variation. Something like this. We're not there yet though. So as we can see right now, maybe the threshold is too high. We can see that we've got like these 3 stripes over here, which is not exactly perfect. I think I would also increase the frequency a bit to spread. I think we lowered it too much. There we go, this is starting to look a bit better. Getting there. There's also other ways you can do this. You can pipe in a fractal into the radius, or you can multiply the curvature with a fractal. There's different things hold slightly different results, and I personally like this a lot. Gives me a lot of control. Now, as you can see over here, it is all eroded away, which is nice. Yeah, this is good stuff. So, it still looks a bit too clean in my opinion. So, let's create an AI image. Let's also create an AI remap float, because we already know that we will be remapping it anyway. Perfect. Let's have a look at the images. Go back to the assets, text, and then let's have a look at which dirt textures shall we use. Maybe the same one again. Why not? Nothing wrong with reusing it. Image breakup 02. I will make another image node, because we want to vary the frequency or the tiling of it, probably individually from the other shader. Let's do another combine float. Now we're going to combine this one and this one. We're going to multiply this. Let's add this in over here to the mix weight. What do we have over here? Once again, it's not tiled enough, so maybe 3 by 3. And this would be the total map. Let's have a look. Sometimes I like to zoom out and see what the overall appearance is like. It's important to see. So often you look at small details and then you lose the overall picture, but was actually really important is the value differences, etc, etc. All these lighting concepts, they also apply in shading. Over here we won't worry about this, because There's another paint layer coming on top. I'm not the biggest fan of how this is getting eroded over here. I think you need to be... I think there's too many gray values. Yeah, I think we need to crunch it a lot more. Something like this. Creates more of a chipped look rather than a faded look. I'm not the biggest fan of all this over here. It's too much. It's just too much. Let's try and change up, because this will be right where we will be looking at the asset. Okay, so that's something. Let's make this a little bit neater. There we go. Once this clears up, this will be pretty nice. A nice chipping, and then we've got the edge, erosion. That's all good stuff. Let's pause this and save it again. And we need to add in the paint layer. So, another AI standard surface. And I call it matte can paint. Perfect. Another mix shader. Number 1, number 2. And we're going to select this object and assign it. Mix label paint. Perfect. So let's load in an image, because we already know that we want to vary the color information of the paint, and I've painted the maps. So color paint UDIM 1001. I'll later show how we work with UDIMs, but just because this is one object, it's not for this. It's for the little paint tubes. Image can paint color. And let's duplicate the image node, and let's immediately also look for the ISO map of the paint. Perfect. ISO. Straight up pipe that in, add color R to the mix, and over here straight up into the color, and let's see what this does. Perfect. So we have a bit of color information now. It doesn't look so convincing yet, in my opinion. Let's have a look at what the shader actually is doing. I don't want it to be that glossy. It's supposed to be old. I'm going to more of the like very dim 0.5 value. And once again, I'm not tweaking any of the other attributes over here. You can build complex shaders by just layering things. Yeah. Okay, so now that we have the isolation map, then we have the paint, and this, I mean, it looks decent. It's working, but it's not convincing that it is paint right now, I think. So what I would like to do is add in a displacement map just for the paint. So what are we going to do? We've got the isolation map, and as a cheap way, I will create another image, and I've made a blurred version of the isolation map. So once I'll combine float, as we multiply these two, we will get some height variation, right? But not outside of the region of the paint. So all I did is create a nice by blurring it, it creates a nice little ramp over here that then goes to the full value, and then we cut it off by multiplying it again with the original isolation map. Image again, ISO blurred. For production shading stuff, I would not be doing this technique of just blurring it. I would try and make a more sophisticated height map, but for now, for this, it will do. Okay, so we have this combined float, and then we need to connect the displacement. So how do we do this? Let's select the shape node first. In the Arnold tab, here we go to subdivision, and let's increase this to, let's try 3 subdivisions. We can always go higher if we need to. But over here, we've selected auto bump already. So auto bump, what this will do is, it will subdivide the mesh 3 times. And then it will try to apply the displacement map. And for all the geometry that isn't there, so if the resolution of the mesh is not dense enough, it will create a bump map automatically from the remaining, the remaining information. So this is an incredible feature of Arnold, I think, and it saves a lot of render time. So it kind of cheats the light by not having to subdivide the geometry so much. It often really, really helps getting those last finicky details out of displacement maps where you don't necessarily want to, like subdivide to 20, 30 million polygons. So, perfect. Now that we've set that up, how do we connect the displacement map? We're going to select the shading group of our assigned material, which is this mix shader. Over here in the shading group, we have some attributes. We have a surface material, which is the mix material. Now we have volume and a displacement. So naturally, we are going to drop it into the displacement. Add value into displacement shader. There we go. Right now, I assure you this will look pretty horrible, but we are going to try it anyway. Okay, this is good because I can illustrate some points for this. So as you can see, we have some displacement, but we have also some weird stuff happening over here. It seems to be clipping. Yeah, this is also way too high, but it's good to illustrate the clipping. So this clipping occurs because of the bound padding. Usually I set this to about 0.1. This increases the bounding box of your object, and it will still ray trace in the extra padding. So over here we have not added extra padding, and it doesn't know to ray trace over here. So that's what a bound padding is for. If we try this again, it won't make so much difference because this displacement is way too high. What we will do for that is create another AL remap float. As you can see, I really use this so often, like all the time. You can also just connect it like this. Perfect. So in this displacement node, usually when you manage displacement, you want to disable the clamping because often you also go into negative values and this just clips it. So even though we don't use this, I'm going to disable this for good practice, and then select the output max and reduce it a lot to maybe something 0.1, 10% of what it was. So then right now it will recalculate, and there we go. Now we can start to see what is going on. Over here, so you can see that we started to add some height information. In my opinion, it's a bit much right now, but we can tweak that. Let's try and tweak it to 0.075. often when I'm adjusting displacements, you will want to update the full scene. The shortcut is Control U, and this will essentially erase all of it, erase all of the Arnold data, and just build the whole scene again for fresh. So this is often necessary when working with displacement maps, and it stores the previous geometry, and then it just when you work with displacement maps, update the full scene to get predictable results. I still think it's a bit too much. We can go lower, 0.05. Sometimes it does it by itself because Arnold knows that it has to, but not necessarily always, so it's good to know that this is here. Perfect, so now we have some height information in there. Let's have a quick look at what the map looks like. There we go. And then we remap it, but you really can't see the values because it's such small values we are working with over here. Perfect, so do we need to adjust anything over here? No, I don't think so. Maybe the weight of the specular of the paint, maybe let's drop that to 0.5. Should be pretty rough. Yeah, let's just get it at 0.5 as well. That was okay. Okay, so now that we have built the whole shading network, let's start adjusting some things, because I'm not so convinced of, for example, the tin and the rust over here feels like there's too many mid values once again as over here. I want more of a chipped look. So let's take a look at this again. And yes, I can already tell that there's too many mid values. So in the AL remap float, we just need to crunch it up. I think something like this will work nicely. Creates harder edges, and harder edges are nice in shading because a hard edge shows nice resolution, and whenever you always have soft edges, it just kind of feels low res, and it's not often something you want. So, am I pleased with this? I still think that maybe it's a bit too orange and maybe not old enough looking. So what I will do is, where we mix the tin and the label, over here we combined the main isolation map with the curvature, right? Let's have a look at that. Perfect. And then we added in another breakup image. And this is the one I want. So I want to get some more values back in and then crunch them some more. Okay. Looking at it as right now, so I also think that maybe the tin needs that extra bit of saturation. It feels a bit too steelish, not very much like tin at all. So try and adjust the color values of this. Is too much. Maybe there's the... Let's just play around with it a little bit more. Maybe I want this to be a little bit rougher. 3, 2, 5. I don't know how convinced I am yet. There's a bit more value in there. And it pops up a little bit more. We definitely have the everything here. Change this. It's all about, creating something that looks pleasing to you, and often it requires a bit of back and forth. You can't just always be guessing the values, and suppose you get them right from the first time. It's always a back and forth. But I do think it illustrates the workflow of layering shaders pretty well in this object. It just always you're adding the complexity, and adding complexity in CG is good stuff. So to wrap this up, the shading of this object, I think I will, on the label shader, I'll add in a bit more matte on this. 0.35 maybe. The rest is okay. 0.3. Okay, so one last thing would be to select the, let's just pause this, select the other objects over here. And these I am just going to assign the rust and tin mix. No paint and color information. There we see that we definitely have some information here, which is nice. So usually what I would do is I wouldn't be revolving around this so much, but rather I'd be rotating the sky dome. I can grab this. Yes. Screw it. There's not enough space on my screen. So over here you can really see the light reacting with it exactly how I want. Once again, the displacement maps of these are not the best. I think I would like them to look slightly different, but it illustrates the point of setting them up at least. Maybe there's too much of all this. Yeah, I'm going to quickly adjust that. Matte tin label over here. This should be the one causing the troubles. Yeah, this breakup. I swear we were adjusting this just a second ago, but there you go. You go back and forth, and then you make decisions and come back to them. There we go. And now we should have. Yes, I like this better. Feels a bit more plausible. Perfect. So next up we will be shading the little paint tubes. So over there we will be discussing the UDIM workflow in Arnold and a bit more of a different material. So for example, subsurface scattering on the little tops, etc., etc.